beatbox if they want to.
Somebody else can beatbox? Well,
Yeah.
we're live, so...
I'm gonna try and play a previous episode on my phone and get the music to come out.
Oh, we are... Look at the classy production values we have. It's staggering. Okay.
Ooh, I like
Hey,
it.
hey, we're actually live, aren't we?
We are
live.
live, yeah.
People are waiting for the theme music with bated breath right now.
Okay,
Well-
so I'm reaching an all-time peak of pro podcasting here. I'm parked out I'm in a rental car parked outside a Starbucks on the free Wi-Fi.
I'm in a very nice hotel in London that has Young's Bitter in the minibar. Well, it used to have Young's Bitter in the minibar. Most of it's in my belly now.
Yeah.
But it's very comfortable, but the Wi-Fi's not great, so I may drop out and rejoin occasionally. There we go.
Are we getting some music here? Oh, we're getting... Okay.
Okay, that's about all the music that we're going to get. Welcome to Scalawags, episode 36, Collections, Standards, and Platforms? Yes, platforms.
Platforms.
Dropping is not my friend.
So we got cut off, apparently, in the middle of the last episode because Josh's connection flaked out, and then somebody was saying something and it just cut off in the middle. So where did we get to in the standards thing? Do we have any conclusions on the standard library or the standards library?
I'm curious as to what you guys actually covered, because I wasn't there, and I don't watch our content because it doesn't meet my standards. So,
we certainly didn't make it as far as a conclusion in our random ramblings. I think there were a lot of things discussed. Let's see if I can remember any of them. There was the whole talk about small core library, but still having some kind of batteries included distribution, and then we wandered into the realms of having more than one possible batteries included distribution. So, having an EPFL distribution from the EPFL Scala Lang site, possibly having a type safe one, possibly having a type level one, and I put forward the idea of a sort of super package idea like Ubuntu has. So in Ubuntu, there's different flavors of Ubuntu that you can download. There's like Xubuntu and Kubuntu and various other ones. And these things have these meta packages, which are empty packages other than they list a bunch of dependencies that sort of bring down all of the recommended packages that make up that particular distribution. And apparently after... uh-oh, here come the effects. After that episode, somebody said that was actually done already for some of the, or in some limited cases in some of the Scala libraries. I can't remember which one they said it was now, but it made sense at the time. I'm like, oh yeah, they probably do that. So that's what I can remember of the discussion. And everybody muted themselves.
I think there was a lot of agreement that I guess that the community needs better mechanisms for people to find and install libraries, and that maybe the emotions would not be running quite so high about so-called standards. If the infrastructure was there to support more pluralism, right? I mean, new people just sort of fall back on whatever ships with the standard download because the barriers to getting started with other sorts of libraries are pretty high.
See, I actually really disagree with that point. Like, I mean, I do 100% agree that we need better support for pluralism and better ways of discovering libraries. Like Maven is a really good way of getting them via SBT, but like discovering them is hard. But the standard library, is basically a trump card. Like it's always going to trump everything. And the example that you should have in your mind is list, right? There's a list in the standard library. It's very, very easy to write your own list. It's actually very easy to write your own list that is better than the one in the standard library. That is not hard at all. And there are lists that are available in other libraries like ScalaZ which do this. No one uses them, basically. Like, and now that I've said that, there's going to be like 3 people tweeting at me saying that they use iList and ScalaZ. But like, the point is that if something is in the Scala standard library and it's not egregiously awful, chances are people will use it in preference to things that are in a third-party library, even if they have the third-party library. So a counterexample is either, right? When I'm using ScalaZ, I don't use the standard libraries either because ScalaZ is a lot better. But like collections in particular, because every library is going to return things in terms of Scala standard library collections, Scala standard library abstractions for things. You have to be able to work with that. And if you want to work with something like iList, you have to spend all your time converting back and forth, and you kind of live in these 2 separate universes. It's like things are going to fall back on the thing which is guaranteed to be everywhere, even if there are options which are high probabilities of being everywhere. Because no matter how high your probability is, the standard library is guaranteed.
Okay, so on that note,
nice beard, by the way. Really liking that beard.
I wanted a beard, and I thought this one looked really nice.
Did that just
want to
grow when
you
you got your PhD?
Sorry?
Yeah, it comes with the tweet.
Did you not see Heather went like this a couple of seconds ago? She went, and the beard just popped out.
Well, I thought that a monocle was better for a PhD, so I tried to be more hipster with the beard, but I guess I should put the monocle on.
Anyway, I didn't want to derail. Carry on.
Okay, so Daniel, you were saying that okay, there's this situation that happens where you just choose a thing that everybody always has. I mean, that's like an idiot's description of the very high level thing that you just described. But my point is that going back to what Seth was saying about having some way of actually finding other libraries and whatnot, wouldn't you expect then that basically other options? I mean, so I know that there's a large community of people that know that ScalaZ exists and that there's this other either in ScalaZ. But I mean, maybe the people who just go to work, they don't even care about the language that they work in. They're not, die-hard enthusiasts. They don't, pay attention to all the community stuff that we do all the time. Don't you think that perhaps those people wouldn't discover ScalaZ maybe unless they found it through something like Stack Overflow or some other thing, and then they're like, there's all this controversy, I don't know. Wouldn't it be nice if there was some way of indicating, okay, there's a library out here, there's a lot of people using it, oh, that's interesting. A lot of people vote this up, or there's some way of being able to see that a lot of people use this thing and that it's suggested for whatever reasons. Wouldn't you think then that this is a rather more objective way of being able to select what's not already shipped by standard? So let's assume this whole proposition that happened in the last episode and is in existence on some mailing lists, this whole idea of a Scala core and a Scala platform. Let's just say that this didn't exist for now, and that we still have the standard library as it is today. Now, if there was some way of promoting other things that people actually use to people who aren't, using Twitter intensely and reading Stack Overflow and answering Stack Overflow questions, like people who are active in the community. If other people that were not super intensely active in the Scala community could find things like the alternate versions of either or validation or all of these other things, don't you think that they would then get many more votes up? There would be many more people actually using them, and they could eventually maybe, overtake what is currently the either that's everywhere. And the either that is everywhere, let's assume maybe potentially I think maybe either is too central, but other things in the standard library could maybe eventually be taken slowly out and put into something called platform. I mean, don't you think that this is maybe a better universe that we could live in?
I think it is a better universe that we could live in, but I'm actually going to mute you because you're echoing for some reason. Maybe it's the beard. But it would be a better universe that we would live in. I'm not at all arguing that having this kind of objective, magical way of people discovering things really easily and understanding how things weigh against each other. I'm not arguing that that would be a bad situation. It's strictly better than what we have now. But the picture that you should have in your mind is, I am Joe Schmo writing a parser library, and I need to return a list of results. I want my parser library to be used by a lot of people. Even if Scala Z is in this magical repository of like awesome Scala frameworks, and even if it's really clearly understood that there's an alternative list inside of there, do you think I'm going to use that, return that alternative list, or am I just going to return scala.list? Because everyone has scala.list, and you can always convert scala.list to something else if you want it. Like, I'm going to speak the lingua franca. And I think that there's, like, you brought up a point about centrality, right, with either. And I think it's a really good point, because either and list and things like that, and sort of by definition, the collections are really, really central. Something like JSON, for example, like, we've seen how third-party JSON libraries have completely taken over for Derek Chenbecker's horrific JSON thing that's inside of the standard library. For everybody who knows that they're out there, like everybody else uses a third-party one, because it's not a super central thing. It's not a common protocol that we all have to speak. Things that are common protocols, like either, list, string, those, like, we can't supersede what's in the standard library. We'll never win against it.
There is a downside to this, though, and I admit that it's a very training-centric one, but then I do a lot of training, is I can teach list and I can teach vector. They're good, safe things to teach because they're part of the platform library. When somebody asks me to teach them JSON, these days I actually have no idea which one to use anymore. And whichever one I pick, it will likely be wrong because there are so many to choose from and they're using a different one. It used to be that Spray was sort of head and shoulders above the others, so that made it a somewhat easier choice, but then Spray hasn't really been updated a lot, and it's using a lot of features that are starting to get deprecated in Scala now, and its future is less well known now that Spray is owned by TypeSafe, and TypeSafe does play JSON, and it threw the whole thing up in the air for me now. So when people say, I need to learn JSON, I'm like, let me tell you about type classes, and then most of the good JSON libraries use this type class approach. They all vary a bit, but the best I can do is sort of give you a rough idea of how these things work now, and then tell you a bunch of libraries to go off and see if you can choose one of them. And it definitely does make it harder from a training perspective, and it's not just training, it's other centralization of skills, people coming in knowing a particular set of APIs. I mean, I know there's downsides to having standards and blessed implementations. There are also some pretty strong benefits to having those as well, in that it is a common language that people speak. And really what we need to do is try and make those better if we can.
I mean, I think that some libraries do acquire enough momentum that they kind of become, de facto standards. They're never going to be de facto standard protocols, which is the distinction I was trying to make earlier. But like something like JSON, right? The problem is that there is no clear de facto standard anymore.
Right.
Spray was really common before. Now not so much. Like, I don't know what the de facto standard is. I would probably just.
I don't either.
I would actually open up Trillion and like chat some people and ask what they think if I had to pick a JSON.
If somebody's willing to go on the record, then let me know, and I will simply teach that. And if anybody says, why are you teaching that, I will say, Daniel Spiewak told me to, or something like that, and just divorce myself from all responsibility.
But Daniel, there are things like Scala that are standard.
Daniel, I don't actually understand I get this distinction you're making between like protocols, so that things can even talk to each other, and libraries. Are you arguing that if something is like a protocol, that it should be in the standard library, otherwise we'll have chaos? Or are you arguing that those are exactly the things that must not be in the standard library because they will squash competition, and that's terrible?
Which side do you want me to take? Because I have opinions on both sides of that, honestly. Like, I can see arguments for both sides. So to be really clear about the distinction, right? I brought up the example of list, and Heather talked about either and how either is like really standard. I consider those to be protocols because it's really common to exchange lists, like between completely unrelated parts of your code, between completely unrelated frameworks. Returning a list from a third-party API is really common. What is not common is having to interchange JSON ASTs, right? Really, really uncommon, except like within the confines of a carefully cloistered web framework type thing. So JSON ASTs, not a protocol. JSON parsers, certainly not a protocol. List and either, definitely a protocol. So the point, which I think is central to the whole question of is standard library good or bad, which is what Seth was driving at, is like, do you want protocols to sort of grow organically and democratically and like, you know, sort of emerge from the chaos, or do you want there to have like the blessed "this is how things work" approach? And honestly, like, tell me which side you want me to argue, because I don't think either side is completely correct.
Both.
Oh God. Okay.
Yes, we want both. We want it all
to listen to you argue with yourself. Go ahead. Go.
Okay. Okay. So the argument that I would put forward for standards emerging is protocol standards emerging is you have the ability to evolve them. When you standardize something, you're basically putting a flag in the ground, and you're saying this is the thing. This is the ultimate, best, optimal thing. It will never be any better than this. No one better try to do any better than this, because they're just going to be wrong, because mine is the only right one. Let's call this the Guido approach. And this is advantageous in many ways. Okay, I need to come back to that argument. But like having this emergent thing means that we don't have one stake in the ground. We've settled on one thing because we all need to interchange. But if someone does something brilliant, like for example, like finds a way to write down an HList type that doesn't make beginners cry, then you know all of a sudden we don't want to use list anymore. We want to use something else, or you know, we don't want to use either anymore. We want to use this better either over here, and the community can move to that. So it gives us flexibility to grow and evolve organically by sort of wisdom of the masses. The counter argument and the sanity that I see for putting things in the standard library is number one, wisdom of the masses. Masses are not very wise. Sorry. Number two,
a person can be smart, but people are stupid, as my good friend Gene used to say.
That's yeah, and I mean no offense. Like the Scala community is great. I love everyone, and there are some really smart people here. But democracy is a terrible form of government. It's just better than all of the others. Like and with standards in particular, like having this mass confusion of like, well, maybe I should be using this list, maybe I should be using that list, and then for people trying to merge those two universes, like I'm using frameworks A and framework B, and they're both using different notions of lists, I have to convert between them. It pushes the burden of that complexity onto the users, the consumers of the framework, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. It also means that even in the absolute best case scenario, where the community kind of like some sort of Monte Carlo ant colony simulation converges on like the one best thing, and then this other thing comes up and we discover, oh, this is better. So like the optimum is like the ant colony sort of moves over here. In this transitional period where the ants are making random paths on your cute little animation screen, like even the people who love the wisdom of the masses are going to be really confused, because some people are still going to be here and some people are going to be over on this new better thing, and transitions take time. Whereas with standards, a stake in the ground, there's no transition. It just is. It's done. It's always there. So
can I offer a third note on this, which is that I believe, I don't think I'm going to get a lot of opposition to this viewpoint. The third option is that we have a standard library that's about 3 years out of date, and because nobody can agree what to do, it doesn't change at all, and it remains just exactly what it was 3 years ago. I don't think that benefits anyone at all. Pretty much anything has to be better than that.
So this is like the revised narcissistic point of view, right? So the primary narcissistic point of view is that libraries in general are bad and everyone should use assembly. And the secondary narcissistic point of view is like, stick with what you had 5 years ago and never change it.
It definitely isn't serving any purpose to just keep everything exactly as it is right now. Even, no matter what we do, and I do think that there's a kind of general warning that I always issue Scala community-wise, which is the Scala community in general does have a tendency to paralyze itself with the need to have a perfect solution, to the point that they don't get a better solution than what they have right now because everybody's waiting for the perfect one to show up. And I'm a big believer in, if you can do something easily now that improves things a bit, you should do it, whether you're going to do something better in the long term or not. Go ahead and fix something now. The future, way off ideal thing may happen later or it may not. Either way, if you can improve things now easily, you should do it. So, yeah.
So, in other words, action speaks louder than words.
Yeah, well, I guess that's a much more succinct way of putting it. Much better one. But yeah, I do think that we've got into a bit of a stalemate with the current library in that, whatever the quality of the library was, stuff has been learned in the last 3 or 4 years, and that should be represented in some way. We should be able to move things. We shouldn't be paralyzed. Why do I keep saying paralyzed? This is the jet lag talking. We should not be paralyzed by indecision or fear. We should do something, damn it. Somebody should do something.
So I think, just like in sort of the argument for continuous releases and things like that, I think that having a really active policy where you don't spend 10 years in committee trying to think about what the next step to take is. You just take the next step. Like, that works. It works even with standards. It works even with things that break medical centers when they go down, as long as it is very easy for you to not only take another quick step after that, but potentially take a step backwards, right?
Yeah.
It has to be very, very, very easy for you to iterate to circumvent that kind of process. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you need to have both sides.
Yeah, there's this whole anti-fragile thing that companies love to talk about these days, and one of the primary rules in that is if something's painful, you should do it much more often, because the only way it's going to become less painful is if you do it all the time. So if it's hard to deploy, you should deploy more, and you'll end up making the deployment better, and so on and so forth. It's sort of one of those core things. So if changing the libraries is hard, we should change the libraries a lot more often, all the time, and get really good at changing them incrementally and rolling them back and forwards, and actually start getting this thing underway of making some changes. Yes, there's probably going to be some mistakes along the way. If you never want to make a mistake, you'll never get anything good done.
What about enterprise users?
They can always stick with the version that they've got, or whatever. I hear this all the time. No one's going to make you get the next version of Scala, necessarily. If you want to stick with 2.11.5, then go for it. I don't think that's going to get unsupported anytime desperately soon. At some point you'll have to move, but
in my experience, and maybe my experience is less enterprisey than some others, so please feel free to correct me, but in my experience, enterprises are not as monolithic and completely stuck in the mud as they used to be, and certainly not as monolithic and stuck in the mud as the stereotype is. They do move, they do adapt, and what enterprises don't want is failure to communicate precisely about things that are changing, because what you don't want is uncertainty in your process. But if you're certain about the change, then the change isn't a problem anymore. This was the problem with Scala 2.7, right? Is everything was changing all up in the air whenever a grad student had a strange dream and woke up with an idea. And there was no communication whatsoever. As long as there is communication, which there is now, change is okay.
Okay, so on that note, what do you suggest? So you have Dick over here on this side of the ring saying, change it constantly, break everything, and make everybody bleed. Eventually it won't hurt anymore. That's what he's saying.
Because we'll all be dead.
So we have that guy on that side doing this, and then you hear Daniel over here, sweet, sensible Daniel saying, well, Enterprise, they're really not that slow. They're good guys. They just need to know when to change things. Okay, so given these two viewpoints, what's the middle ground? I mean, it sounds like there can be compromise here. So the idea is what? Change stuff but notify Enterprise? I haven't quite been able to ascertain some sort of general wisdom yet. Like, what if you guys ran really hard into each other real fast, what would the end result be? This opinion at the end.
Daniel probably splat on the ground because Dick is in better shape than I am.
No. I'm a lover, not a fighter.
All right. I feel like the middle ground is continuing to improve on what TypeSafe has already been improving on with respect to communication surrounding release changes, and just being really, really specific about not only that communication, but also schedules and when you're allowed to break things and when you're not. Version numbers, schemes are a really, really good way of communicating. This is something that I don't think Scala does very well because we essentially only have 2 components to our version number, since the 2 is frozen forever and can never change. It's like Linux basically. But I think that things like the way the release notes are written up, the way the understanding of kind of the tick-tock compatibility cycle goes with, this cycle will break language, this cycle will break standard library, et cetera, et cetera. Knowing when things are going to be compatible, when they're going to deprecate, when they're going to break, just continuing to improve on that, and then working within that process, I think, is how we make changes.
Well, if I can, again, going back to, I hate to sound like a stuck record, but I think we have the opportunity to learn from another model that I see used a lot, which is Linux distributions. There's healthy development in Linux. There's lots of different distributions. That's literally what they are. They're different. The Linux kernel is, with some some minor version differences, largely the same core, but different distributions make different decisions about the UI that they're going to use and the bundled binaries. Some of them are targeted towards audio. Some of them are targeted towards content creation. Other ones are server-based. But the thing is, they all come together in this community where they develop new stuff. They all have a pool of good quality implementations to draw from. They all make different decisions, and you do see that the different distributions sometimes learn from each other and make decisions. Ubuntu traditionally has been this sort of rather opinionated and somewhat bullish one that makes these kind of choices of, we're going to go with this, we're going to go with, I think Upstart was the last one. They've pretty much finally had to throw in the towel on Upstart. I think they're going with System D in the next version because it's become popular in other distributions. And I know lots of people are saying, oh, it's a bad move, blah, blah, blah. Thing is, they are reacting to the fact that the market pivots, to use a startup term, and this happens a lot. I think there's something that we could do like that. We could, in my ideal view of things, we have some different Scala distributions. We have the core language, the same at the middle of it all. We have some distributions that are more functional in nature that would package Scala Z and cats and stuff like that in their distribution. We've got probably EPFLs would look a lot like it does now, but hopefully with some improvements. And people will, to some degree, vote with what they use and what they download, and then the other distributions can react to those changes. I don't know if that can work, but I know that it does work in the Linux world. So,
well, I think there are 2 problems with that. One is that operating systems are very different in sort of purpose and usage patterns than languages are. As a general rule, if you're using Linux, you're probably not extending Linux. Most people don't anyway. Whereas when you're using Scala and you're writing a library, you are very literally extending Scala. The other problem that I see is you said, well, the core language will be sort of shared between them, just like the kernel is, between Linux distributions. What is the Scala core language? Like, where do you draw that line?
I guess I'm mainly thinking about the compiler plus whatever would make it into, if there ever is a micro core library, it would be basically the language in that very small library. And then the rest of it, I do think there's still quite a parallel with Linux. When I use Linux, I'm not really using, like right now, I'm not really using Linux. I'm using, but sure, the kernel's running underneath it all, but it's all the crap on top of it that I'm running that makes it a usable system. And that can vary wildly between distributions, like just the difference between GNOME, Unity, or KDE. There's a pretty huge difference in the UI, and the apps that you run and stuff like that. They all come onto the top of it, and that really to me is kind of extending the operating system. Linux on its own wouldn't be much use. I mean, you can do some file operations and stuff like that on it, but it's the package that makes it more useful. So I do think maybe there's more of a parallel there than otherwise, but I do agree. I mean, I think the bigger issue is that the Linux community and the Scala community are different beasts, and we would need to see whether the same thing can actually work in the community setting here than as it does to Linux. But
I'm seeing on Jitter, Rob Norris is saying that there's no need for Scala distributions because everyone just uses SBT. Is that so? I guess if I try to read between the lines there, if everyone who does use SBT already has they're installing nothing on their machine other than a launch script, and then each project is its own universe that's has total control over what versions of Scala it pulls in, what libraries it pulls in, and the level of choice that you have there is effectively unlimited. Now, Rob is saying everyone uses SBT, and that's true for some values of everyone, right? But what if SBT were better, right? He's suggesting that we wouldn't need these distributions if the maybe this is circling back to the point I started with, which is that if it were easier to make choices, then there'd be less need for this this pre-packaging. But SBT doesn't make that as easy as it could. And I think it's true that, well, yeah. So who is this everyone who uses SBT? It's certainly everyone I know in the Scala open source world does.
Yeah.
Right. But and certainly all of us do. But how? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Twitter uses Pants. At least I'd be surprised if they don't, because they put so much effort into making it and promoting it. So I think they're probably not SBT users. I don't know though. But I think there are definitely dissenters in the group.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't worked with enough like enterprisey Scala shops to know, but I certainly do know of other large shops that are using neither Pants nor SBT.
There's not an enormous amount of Scala code, but a substantial amount of Scala code at rich relevance that is actually compiled with Maven, not with SBT. I'm not a fan of that, and my code is not, but it is a thing. And so a lot of, I think that's probably, like the reasoning behind that is probably relatively commonplace, where you have a very large and sprawling Java-based project with a lot of Maven submodules and things like that, and you just want to do like this one thing over here using Scala, because you either want to experiment with getting Scala into your company, or you want to, or you think Scala is just going to do it better. So it has to be integrated in your large, sprawling ecosystem of Maven submodules and Java Enterprise Insanity. So what do? Well, you compile it with Maven, because SBT integrating with that is not pleasant.
It can actually be easier at a company to get a new programming language in than to get a new build tool in.
That is absolutely correct. I mean, especially a programming language like Scala, where it does work inside of all of the existing IDEs, and it does work inside of your existing, submodule hierarchy, and it can use all of your standardized dependencies and your filter sets and all of that. Like, everything works. You just plug it in, and it's a different language, and that's actually a relatively easy sell these days, comparatively. It's certainly not as hard to sell that to management as we like to think it is. What is hard to sell to management is, the whole tool chain. And actually being able to use some of the stuff that we have that is outside of Java.
Yeah, and I do think that there is definitely a need for a clearinghouse or something, anything, where libraries that are popular can rise to the top and be something that you can exchange skills on. You can, from my point of view, you can target for training. We don't have, by way of an example, to give a very concrete one, we don't have JSON in our training arsenal right now because I don't know which one to teach anymore. If I was to teach one, like I said, we teach a sort of generalistic, hey, look at what you can do to JSON with type classes, and then we hold off any kind of specific choice of library because whichever one we choose is going to be the wrong one for somebody, probably for everyone. Sorry.
Just butt in. Just go.
Yeah, go for it.
Dick. Even if there was some sort of, okay, everybody kind of agrees upon this library, whatever it is, there could still be the scenario that Daniel envisioned where another library could rise to the top because it has something that everybody thinks is better, and we should slowly, as a community, shift to that other thing, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I don't see what so I have to say I agree with your overall point where you're trying to say, well, yeah, we need something to tell people to go to use, but I mean, this is a problem in everywhere where you teach anything. You say, well, this is what we use now. It could change in the future. If you're resilient, I mean, I don't know about you, but at least in the ways that I've been taught, people say, well, if you keep learning, that'll be the best because nothing is going to stay the same for
right.
No,
I agree. But I think what we would want to do, I mean, when you're training, you want to hit the biggest target you can. So you want to be able to look around occasionally and say, hey, what's popular right now? Okay, we probably need to have a training module for this. We need to provide something for this. We couldn't do it for every library that's out there. We've got to make some decisions on which ones to go for and which ones not to. So
no,
random, completely crazy idea, like out of left field. How much metadata can Ivy / preferably Maven encode about packages?
Yeah,
like,
you're asking
how much freeform metadata can we toss in there?
I think we're asking the wrong Scalawag. We need the Ivy expert Scalawag.
Yeah. Because here's what I'm thinking. If we can get every single package, at least every major package, to have metadata that is something sufficient that we can mechanically determine this is a package that does JSON using type classes, no exceptions, high performance parsing, like that sort of thing. This is a package that does metaprogramming. It makes records easier, like does just stuff like that, codecs. That sort of metadata. It's relatively easy for us to, using other services, find out what packages are popular in terms of Maven downloads. Combining this together, it would probably be possible to have like a little SBT plugin that you could at the prompt say like need JSON parsing fast, and it just like adds the dependency or gives you a set of like these are the things, and like this is the relative popularity, and search Stack Overflow for 1, 2, or 3 / add to your build file. Like something like that would be very, very easy and might assist with the discoverability if we could get the metadata.
I'm smiling because while you were saying that, I was thinking of the commonalities to this and popular music, and thinking that we're going to launch a generation of library hipsters, people that are like the most obscure library they can find, because anything popular, that's just not cool, man.
Yeah, so somebody's going to see that list that the plugin pops up in 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're just going to hit the 4 button every single time.
The library hipster, I like it.
Yeah. So Daniel, if that SVT plugin existed, I would add that to my global SVT plugins so fast.
It doesn't sound that hard.
I suggested something similar in the Gitter room a few weeks ago, and it's just it kind of baffles me that it doesn't already exist actually.
I think this is one of those things where like all the people who are capable of creating something like this don't really have that strong of a need for it, and it seems kind of trivial. Like if I'm not thinking in the mode of, you know, somebody who doesn't know what's out there discovering things, if I'm just thinking of, you know, Daniel writing code mode, this doesn't seem like it adds that much to me. It doesn't seem like it's doing that much work. But I think that for someone who doesn't have, you know, a broad knowledge of the community and the ecosystem, it'd be really, 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 really good.
Have we managed to reach any kind of conclusion whatsoever? No, it's about normal. I think that I'm seeing some interesting discussion happening on the channel though, and I hold out hope for this future of some kind of, I don't know, platform competition or something that spurs us on to greater heights and lets new ideas get tried out, but still rewards good implementations with, I don't know, market share or whatever, something like that. I guess this is going to be a much longer discussion that goes on, as of course it will be.
Yeah.
Right. Did we kill that? Or does anyone have anything else they want to say? Shall we go to the Gitters and see what the Gitters say? Wow, there's a lot of stuff on here.
Yeah, we can go to the Gitters, and I think we have a couple of other item points. Also, people are reporting on Twitter that like comments are disabled. I don't know how to turn that on.
Comments where?
The Q&A feature, because that I believe has to be enabled at the time the Hangout is started.
Oh, I didn't see a checkbox for it.
Yeah, it's fine, everybody. Just talk to us on Gitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on the Gitters. In fact, not only are we keeping an eye, Heather is the most prolific poster on there right now. I don't know how she's doing it, and talking to us as well. Being unable to multitask.
My beard is the best. That's what helps.
I think it's sort of ironic that I'm the only one here who doesn't have a beard.
Well, you're also the only one not posting.
All right. Do we want to move on to another subject? What's the time doing here?
Wait. So, actually, I was just wondering if actually, never mind. Go ahead, please. Continue.
Me? Oh. I don't know. What did we have next? If we've run out of stuff to say on this one, where's that link of things?
I see more on collections, which we needed Josh for. AWS Lambda.
I can do a quick. I mean, I haven't got a lot to say on it, but I thought it was interesting. I've been messing with Amazon Web Services Lambda thing, which is pretty neat actually. So I don't know how much you know about the Lambda, the AWS offerings, but they're elastic. You know, all their elastic computing stuff. Most of it is based around the idea that you kind of rent time on a box for an hour block at a time, and it's not super expensive, but what it does mean is that if you're doing anything that requires scaling out massively, you pretty much you pay through the nose if you run something for a minute across like 10,000 machines, because they charge you for an hour regardless of what you do. And this thing that they've just launched called Lambda is really pretty interesting. You can write Lambda functions that you deploy. They can't run more than 5 minutes. There's a upper limit of 5 minutes per function run. But depending on the resources you can convince them to give you, and we've managed to convince them to go up to about 5,000 at this point, I think, you can scale out massively, and they charge you by the hundreds of milliseconds. And so we've been doing a bunch of testing with this and got a bunch of stuff working with Scala on AWS Lambda. It's not an officially supported language, but the JVM and Java is supported on there. And Gilt wrote a plugin that does Lambda deployments, makes it pretty easy. And I've just been messing with that. I actually put in a couple of enhancements to their plugin as well to allow multiple functions. But it's actually really fun. It's very easy to get going. It's a lovely API in that all you have to do is write a single function that takes an input stream and produces an output stream, and then you tell Lambda where to find it. So it's really dead simple compared with a lot of the stuff out there. The downsides to it, it sometimes pays the static initialization cost fairly heavily on Scala. So sometimes you run it, it takes just a couple of, a few milliseconds to run. Other times it can take like 2.5 seconds to spin everything up and then run it and then shut back down again. So you never quite know how that's going to work. And one of the things I've been doing is messing with it to get my Amazon Echo to run what they call Alexa skills, which are things that you can talk to and talk back to you, and write those in Scala and then get them running. So upshot of all this is there's a activator template in the future when I can get around to finishing it, which has the Alexa skills kit for doing, I think I'm going to publish the ELIZA one. So of all the stupid demos I could do, I dragged up the old 1970s ELIZA program that psychoanalyzes you, and now you can have your Amazon Echo, you can talk to it and have it psychoanalyze you. So that's a nice easy demo of just back and forth communication. And then eventually I hope to put the massively scaling up kind of stuff out there as well. So that's it. That's all I have to say on that, really. I did a demo at Base Meeting, and I think it went over well, although it wasn't as Scala-y as I thought it was going to be. It ended up being more about AWS and Echo. But I think I sold a lot of Echoes that night. Everybody who was there said, "Oh, I'm going to get one of those. That's awesome."
It sounds like this is about taking computation in the cloud and making it available in a finer-grained way.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the revolution already happened at the level of whole servers, right? Most people, unless they have really special needs, if they need a server, they just spin one up on Amazon. But we don't yet have a lot of solutions for people wanting to do a little bit of computation. Where I mean, it doesn't even have to be that little, right? It's anything less than one server that's sort of out there and usually running. Anything smaller than that, we don't yet have a lot of services offering to do these little bits of work for us.
Yeah, and I think that there have been attempts, like Google App Engine was trying to do this before Lambda got there. But Google App Engine, at least at the time that I looked at it, was pretty limited in what it would actually let you do. They were very strict about things that they would allow to run versus things that they weren't. And one of the things that's really impressed me about Lambda is I haven't found the limits on it yet, other than the time limit and the fact that it does run slower than a dedicated machine would. But given those, with the parallelism, that's not a problem because you just scale it out more, and it runs really fast. But one of the things that I thought we were doing some testing with it early on, using amongst other things Breeze and some of the numeric stuff, some of the other numeric stuff that used native libraries. And we couldn't get it to work at first, and I assumed that it just wasn't allowing the native libraries to run. Turns out that was fine. It was another problem with it. So it lets you run pretty much everything. You can even have JNI and JNA libraries running on it, and everything fires up and runs really well. It's pretty easy to package, and I've been most impressed with how it copes with large scaling. The problem now we've got is that we've got up to, as I say, I think about 2,500 to 5,000 lambdas running at once, and they were all depositing their results into a Postgres database, and that it blew Postgres' mind to have that much data coming in that quickly. So we have another bottleneck to fix now, which is get Postgres out of the picture or find some other way to get the data accumulated. But it's a very fun project. It was actually really easy. It was much easier, I think, than we thought it was going to be to get to this point where something else was the bottleneck now. And I think that's, I don't know how much of this HPC stuff you've done, but it seems like always what you're doing is moving the next bottleneck around. It's like a game of shuffleboard or something. You always find the next bottleneck, and you try and move that one out of the way next, and get it really fast. So that's it. I have nothing else to say on that. I just thought I'd let people know that was happening, and maybe what do you call it? Activates template coming in the not too distant future. So.
Well, cool. Actually, there are a couple of other smaller topics that we could move on to, since we don't have a lot of time left. But Josh's SPT book has been released, and apparently it costs more than £900.
Yeah, £999 on Amazon UK.
Yes, it's an enormous $40. So if you want the deal, you should go to.
The pound has inflated slightly since the last time I checked on it.
Yeah. So the book is called SPT in Action. It's by Josh and Matthew Farwell. That's right, isn't it? And we'll put the link in the show notes. I think a lot of people already know it from the MEEPs because it's been and it's been in electronic preprints now for quite a while. I think at least 2 years.
To the point that when you said it's been released, I'm like, man, I've been using that forever, and it's just been released. So it's become a staple of mine to refer to. So
I've been giving it out. It's a wonderful device. This thing. I mean, the SPT documentation is pretty good, but the book is a lot better, I have to say. Yeah. I mean, when everybody complains about how SPT is so complicated, if you just have the book.
This is Josh's business model, right? Manage a really complicated project, not write enough documentation, and then make a fortune writing a book for it.
I don't know anyone who's made a fortune writing a computer book yet.
£999.
Well, that's true enough. I don't necessarily think that was intentional for the impression that I got. So,
like, if he's going to price his books that way.
But if anybody did buy it for that price, then awesome is all I can say. Go, Josh, go.
Well, what percentage of that goes to Josh? It probably goes to a third-party seller. I mean, 99.9% of it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So if you bought the book at that price, congratulations, you just gave Josh a latte. But like, it's not going to be anything more than that.
No, that's true.
In other news, so actually, does anybody know about Eugene's new plugin? I actually can't comment on that. I would assume that Josh is the guy that can. If not, anybody? No? If not, has anybody heard about Scala off-heap?
Yes, Scala off-heap is amazing.
Tell us about it, Daniel.
I haven't had a chance to use it in a real project yet, but I have, it's basically on my table of things to use, and I have use cases for it. I just haven't had the time to switch over. Basically, looping back around to high-performance computing, anyone who's done any serious sort of HPC or data manipulation, especially data manipulation in and out of files, from network sockets, things like that, you find very quickly that the JVM's heap is not a one-size-fits-all fantastic memory management model for everything. And in fact, for a lot of problems, the JVM's heap is actually really, 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 really slow. And you just don't want to pay the penalty of garbage collection. You don't want to pay the indirection of all of the pointers. You just don't want to have that. Sometimes you don't even want to have objects. Now, it's always been possible to do stuff off-heap yourself through one of two mechanisms. You can either use sun-misc unsafe, like all of the hipsters are doing now, and all of the hipsters will be very all of the hipsters are going to be very sad when it goes away in, I think, Java 9. But sun-misc unsafe for doing off-heap data manipulation works. It's very fast. And it gives you some nice APIs. Well, nice, that's a relative word, but it is going away, and sun-misc unsafe is better at other things. The second way that people do off-heap stuff conventionally is with direct byte buffers, and literally you just have a big old bag of bytes, and you just index into things, and you have to be really careful not to use the wrong functions because ByteBuffer's API is terrible. But like you can do stuff. You can kind of, and there's libraries out there that have existed as long as ByteBuffers have for doing like representing data structures in off-heap memory, that sort of thing. Because you have bytes, you have raw bytes. So if you're comfortable programming in C, you can do this sort of thing, except in Scala, right? Scala off-heap takes the comfortable programming in C out of the equation. It is very, very, very easy to use Scala off-heap. It is lexically scoped, so it's, as a general rule, extremely safe. It will free things up for you, make sure that things are scoped accordingly. You can defeat that scoping if you want, as you sometimes have to do when you're passing data around between places. But generally speaking, it will try really hard to keep you statically safe. It has data structures. It has data structures of various forms. It makes it really easy to kind of move things around and deal with stuff. It's also really upfront about its limitations, right? So like, if you have an off-heap array, for example, like that, don't try to put on-heap objects into your off-heap array because it simply will not work. The instant the garbage collector sweeps through things and moves those objects around, your data is lost. But it is a really, 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 really nice library, very well thought out, very fast, and not dependent on sun-misc unsafe.
Mm. This is harkening back just momentarily to the lambda stuff. One of the activities that I engage in a lot with lambda is trying to find the smallest, lightest library to do something, because as I mentioned, it can be a lot slower than an EC2 instance, particularly for that static initialization phase and everything like that. So I spend a fair amount of effort in finding the lightest JSON parsing library, for example, because there's a lot of JSON work involved. Finding the lightest way to connect Postgres and throw some data in there or something like that. It would be interesting to see if Scala off-heap can be made to work with it and whether it renders any huge performance benefits in terms of being able to use it on Lambda. Because I'm on the lookout for anything that helps with that right now. So
off-heap data structures are one of those things that, like, it's very easy to see, like, how it will work, right? And it's very easy to think of applications for it. It's somewhat harder to reason through whether or not it would be a benefit. Because, I mean, for as much as I was dissing, Hotspot's heap memory structure earlier, like, Hotspot's heap memory structure is optimized for a particular set of use cases. And that's a relatively broad set. So if you're falling into that, you're not going to do better by going off heap. You really won't.
Okay.
It's only when you really, really need off-heap data. Another example of where you might need off-heap data is if you're dealing with a lot of data and your GC pauses are really long, that sort of thing.
That's not really an issue in Lambda because they don't usually run long enough to actually worry about a GC pause.
Yeah.
But
yeah, for the people who need off-heap data, you really, really need it, and this does it extremely well.
Oh, very cool.
And that's a project by Dennis Shabalin, right?
I think so.
Yeah, that's currently his project right now. So he's putting quite a lot of effort into it on a regular basis, which means, well, I mean, as far as I can tell, he plans on continuing to work on it for some period of time, which is a good thing for everybody, basically.
Yeah.
I would love to have a problem that I needed that for. I'm afraid I don't though, but it really does sound like fun to. It makes me want to go find a problem that I want it for.
I'm not sure that you really want a problem that you want that for, because usually when you have those sorts of problems, it's miserable.
Right.
Like you start doing terrible things like allocating, purely in memory MapDB instances and stuff like that. It's just like nothing. No one deserves to have to deal with that.
Right. I almost can't believe it. I've been programming in Java and Scala for much too long if I actually now find myself with an urge to manually manage memory.
Is this like a rite of passage? It's like you've become a Java veteran when you've written your own class loader. It's like you've become like a scarred veteran when you need to move your data off of the heap and away from the GC. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I do remember writing a lot of like object pooling and caching code in Java 1.1 days,
yeah,
pre-hotspot
before
days,
Hotspot did that.
when it actually helped and you could actually get some real performance benefits from that. But yeah, that code all got deleted a long time ago.
I love the lag, like, because I came into the Java ecosystem right at that transition point, right? And there was this hilarious lag in terms of like what the best practices were and what like all of the blogs recommended and things like that. Because there's still like I think there's still an object pool in the Java standard library. Like there's all this stuff. And there were all these people saying, yeah, you need to get performance with this and this and this. Like it's all about object pooling and all about shared allocations and interning. Like and all of this stuff, and by this point, Hotspot had already rendered all of that obsolete and redundant and actually slower than just letting Hotspot deal with it. But there was this lag in the best practice. It was very, very strange.
I'm not sure if it was an unintentional lag. I think a lot of consultants made a lot of money with that particular set of advice. Hey, let us come in and we'll sort out your object pool for you.
Oh my gosh.
It'll only take us about 6 months and about 10 engineers. No worries.
To sort out a hash table.
Ditcher, are you saying that you personally made a mint from this yourself?
No. I was on the receiving end mostly. I remember the black suits flying in, like the ravens of doom, on projects.
Nevermore.
Nevermore, quoth the raven.
Well, just
yes.
as a follow-up sort of finishing off point related to Scala off-heap, it was released a few weeks ago, so it is properly fetchable, I believe, with SPT and other tools. So, I mean, if you want to see more, I'm sure we'll post a link in the show notes, but there's a GitHub repository aptly named Scala-off-heap, if you're so inclined.
Excellent. Excellent. I am so tired that I can barely think straight at this point.
I mean, you can tell the difference.
Well, yeah, I know. I can BS just as well at this side, but
you're so tired you haven't even lifted your beer into frame.
Oh,
the whole
it's
episode.
true.
My beer's dead. I've drunk both of the Young's bitters that were in the mini.
He's over and drinks it.
It's all over, man. I'm crawling into bed after this.
Well, on that note, we should probably wrap things up.
Well, next Tuesday then. Let's see if we can pull it off. Back-to-back weeks of the Scalawags. That'll be excellent if we can do it.
Sounds good.
So much content. More content than the world really wants.
Oh, I think that's true for any value of n. It doesn't matter whether n is small or large. It's always true.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Signal.